I would like to refer this to one of the speakers who made a statement that councillors need to get this in their head. Perhaps undermining some councillors here. Of course, I may be wrong because English is not my mother tongue. Does the panel really believe there is democracy in Australia? If so, what about the recent announcement to build East-West Link for $8 billion down the throat of the public in Victoria, an election gambit and ploy? The question is coming down. We also had Justin Madden, who gave direction like a mad person, similar to Saddam Hussein, and we all know what happened to him and his government. It appears that our friend Dr. Dennis Napthine will have the same fate in November next. If there is democracy, which is a soft version of dictatorship, why are the graphitic people, which is a scourge on the modern society, are taken care of? Thank you.
There were some strong views there, but underlying that, something I said before, I agree that we engage as decision makers, whether that's the federal government, the state government, the local government. We find it much easier to engage on the easy stuff, and we find it much harder to engage on the big issues. I agree, there has not been, from my perspective as a community engagement professional, I would love there to have been significant community engagement around decisions around transport in metropolitan Melbourne. I think it would be fabulous to be involved in a community conversation around how transport is run in Melbourne. Those decisions are made, and then we get to be engaged in, some of the minor ones. I'm about to do some work on, should the sound barrier be here, or here? I mean, that's a really minor decision. We don't pick up. I would love us to be engaging on much bigger decisions, whether that's our council budget or whether it's transport or whether it's refugees.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to make the comment. Last year or the year before, Bayside made a decision which was completely void of any community conversation to close 2 childcare centres down. We had the council elections late last year. We've got 7 councillors at Bayside. 4 of the 7 councillors were kicked out, and one of the reasons being because of the decision on childcare. This is a statement directed to Kimbra. Kimbra came in and actually started a community conversation with on the subject of childcare. We've recently made another decision based on childcare due to the public pressure, and even though it probably wasn't a popular decision, I could say that the community has got ownership to a degree on that decision. And I was just wondering, Kimbra, would you like to extrapolate on that? It was such a fantastic program that you ran.
That was the case study I referred to a moment ago, and I was referring to it in terms of community engagement is very useful if you want to make sustainable decisions that stick, because a decision had been made at Bayside about childcare centres that didn't stick. It led to outrage. The process we ran with another consultant, and it was designed by Bayside Council staff. Kenyon, the director, is the director responsible for it, who's sitting there as well. So the process actually was designed by Bayside Council staff. I just had the pleasure of facilitating part of it. It was a deliberative process. We gave a stratified sample, representative sample of 30 residents from Bayside, so we got people of all ages, gender, it was chosen to represent the demographics of Bayside in a room over 5 sessions to deliberate on what they would recommend to council about the childcare centres in Bayside. It was a deliberative process. Which meant it took time, and that group of people came up with options. They debated the pros and cons of those options and came up with a recommendation that was put to council, and a version of that recommendation was accepted by council, wasn't it? And I guess the question back to you is how big is the flack at the moment, because this was only a few weeks ago? Do you think that decision will stick?
Yes, I think that decision will stick because it was an evidence-based decision. Even though I'm highly informed. Yeah, highly informed, thank you. Even though I must say I didn't actually support that decision in the chamber. The decision that was made by council. But I think the community, to a degree, I mean, there is going to be, we're closing one centre and the other centre is going out for an EOI for a not-for-profit organisation. There will be some teething issues. And really that's just due to capacity. Once those capacity issues have been solved, I think the community will be much better accepting of it. But there's certainly not the outrage, there's not the community campaigns, so it's relatively quiet on that front.
So if you can take that example in sort of Metro Melbourne and also raise the example of the cats in the bush, you probably come up with some pretty good approaches about how to handle conflict in the community.
I used to find with Anne Murphy, we're on the local government review panel, which is recently set up. And from this point of view, community engagement, because obviously we're very concerned to ensure that we reach as wide a cross-section of the communities as we can. And just basing on my experience on Stockton, invariably we heard from the noisy wheels all the time, the most articulate, the most confident. And it was an ongoing challenge to encourage a wide section to actually get involved, and invariably it wasn't until they had an issue of complaint that they would come to us. So I guess we're all talking about reactive community engagement, but I guess really we're not putting enough effort, I don't think, into proactively reaching these groups. And initially I was going to address it to Matthew because I'm curious to know, with your outside, what sort of interaction do you have with the communities? Are you able to evaluate what sort of impact that has? And anyone else who can offer something would be great.
Question, and same with social media, you're going to get this a squeaky wheel effect. Social media is very much about ego. It's very much about putting your face on, and publishing your face, and things like Twitter. It's about who can, say the smartest thing in the shortest amount of words. What we do to make sure that we get diversity is we actually measure who's using the forums. That's your first step, actually. You use the data to drive the understanding and therefore the tactics. We ran a project with the Hepburn Shire Council this year where they committed that the top 10 ideas that were voted and shared through social media would inform the council plan. And they took that commitment to the community, and we ran a series of workshops, actual physical workshops, and went to people. We got the plus 65-year-old grey set, as you would imagine, who came up with a number of ideas. They started registering those ideas and then starting to share them through their community, mainly via email. After about 2 weeks of the forum progressing, we noticed that there was a significant gap in younger generations, so we actually could actually respond to that. And so the things we did is go to them, go to the skate parks, go to the schools, actually use those channels to reach people. And in those channels, you actually need to find the squeaky wheel. You need to get the outspoken person who's highly connected and highly involved in everyone's issues, because they're the ones that are going to bring other people. They're the ones that are actually going to champion the engagement process. And I think that's the key. What we also found is that there was a middle bracket of 35 to 45 female that were not getting involved. Understandably, raising kids and running households and ferrying, to and from sport and ballet practice, and they're not going to actually hang out at a workshop or at a town hall event on a Tuesday night or even on a Saturday morning. It's just not going to happen. but they're highly connected on Facebook, and they're actually a community of interest, through the childcare networks. They all communicate on Facebook through that region. And so we thought, great, let's just tap into the squeaky wheels within that community and get them to actually champion the engagement process. So I think, you need to apply, some of the IAP2 principles about, working with the highly involved. They're the squeaky wheels because they are actually the ones that are going to inform the attentives, the people in and around those communities that listen to those people. And the attentives are going to inform the browsers, the people that read newspapers, and that's going to inform public opinion, around the issues and the decisions. And so you actually need to sort of start with focusing on who's really involved in this sort of stuff and who's going to impact or, cause a challenge later down the track if the decision doesn't go their way. So that would be the way we approach it. Through the voting mechanism as well, everyone gets 7 votes through our platform, and so they can spend those votes across multiple questions or ideas, or they can stack them out all in one. And so when we ran this with the Hepburn Shire, we had, the group in Creswick that wanted a swimming pool, and they were sort of putting all their votes on the swimming pool idea, and we had the group in Trentham who said, well, we don't want a swimming pool, we just want access to a rec facility that you have already. Plus there's a swimming pool 10 minutes down the road in Ballarat, so why don't you use that? And so, you're getting this debate happening, and that actually then starts to bring in different types of people. People who aren't necessarily going to connect or sell ideas, but people who are going to bring new information to the table. The mavens, as it were. And so we actually had some people registering comments under these ideas. They were digging and trawling through the council's paperwork from 2 or 3 years ago, looking for that feasibility study for the swimming pool, and saying, well, look, what we've discovered is that that's going to mean a 10 to 15% increase in rates, and frankly, the people in Trentham aren't going to want to deal with that because we don't have access to some basic services. And so, what that meant overall, as the forum rolled out, is that the ideas that were being considered by the community were framed around things like rate equity, which is perfect. That's exactly where you want the community thinking. It's considered and it's strategic, and it's a big question to respond to for council and the community. So I think you can use you've got to integrate technology and face-to-face. You've got to be targeted. You have to go to people. They're not going to come to you. And I think you've got to let it roll, because through those voices, the more trust they have and more confidence they have in participating, they're going to drag different voices in and people who are going to provide input in different ways.
Thank you, Matthew.
Well, I think broad-based participation matters. I think we don't just want the squeaky wheels, we want as many people as possible. And I suppose my experience is that the way we go about getting people excited about coming together into a conversation about things that really matter is really at the heart of it. And a lot of the things we do are utterly boring. Who would want to turn up there? Who wants to turn up on a cold Wednesday night when simply it's going to be a meeting where everyone sits like they're sitting in church, facing the front, a couple of people dominating, fundamentally most of the meetings about information sharing. People don't get excited. They'd rather stay at home and watch television. My opinion is today we have no excuse for not running exciting, engaging type of dialogues. There's enough best practice out there. There's enough tools out there. There's enough wonderful examples. Recently I was engaged with the city of Subiaco, 20,000 people. We engaged 23% of the population in some event that represented them being part of a conversation about what they considered important in their city and the future of that city. But it came about because we used a whole diverse range of ways. We targeted. We recognised a whole pile of ways that people naturally gather. So why reproduce that? Let's start and leapfrog on where people naturally are gathering. We particularly recognise that 25 to 40 age group as the group that often is not present in these things. How do we do that? And again, not just through social media, but a whole pile of other interactive ways and places that we can actually bring people together. So I suppose all I'm saying is there's no excuse today. We've got enough good practice, best practice out there. I have a friend who basically, though, gave us some insight and said, why hold a meeting when you can have a party? And I think that needs to be fundamentally the starting point. A lot of what we do will not attract people because it is bland, boring, and people have an expectation that it's going to be a waste of time. I think what we have to do is actually invest in putting together a program that really does engage people in genuine conversation, not just consultation.
But Peter, that's true, but it'll still be hard. And in planning, you know it best. It's very hard to get people to engage in the strategic planning, but permit by permit, when it's next door to them or down the street or around the corner, that's when they want to have a conversation.
People,
so how do you
I agree with you. People do come together to oppose, and I think as a race we're great at that. We also celebrate disasters like no other race. When we have a bushfire, people mobilise. Yet they don't mobilise to be part of a bushfire ready group to prepare to be better for that bushfire. We do have that tradition. But what I'm increasingly discovering is that if you can create an environment and tap into people's passions and do it in a creative way, people will respond. And I reckon we get 23% of people out of 22,000 actually around a table in a conversation about where they want the city, where they're going. And that's not an isolated example. I was in Lower Hutt in New Zealand where they took on what someone referred to on the panel, one of those hard questions. And that was, how do you want your rates spent? Now have a look at how we have been spending them for the last 15 years. Have a look at how we plan to do it. How would you want to do it? Boy, that council took a huge amount of risk. And they managed to bring together 300 people that night for an interesting process of getting people out into value, kind of like clarification type exercise. And by the end of that night, there was general agreement about the broad areas that people could really support. Now, all I'm saying is, I think it can be done. It's not just the little country towns. It needs to be done in our cities, our suburbs, our neighbourhoods. How we go about it is fundamental. We've got to tap into people's passion and not just into people's anger. And that is where I think far too much of this civic kind of like engagement has actually been.
And Peter, I think you're missing just one really important people. You've got to offer people influence. Why turn up if you're going to have no influence in the outcome? And it's why it's one of the topics for this session that we haven't got to around participatory budgeting. What is really interesting about participatory budgeting, it puts the money on the table up front. It says, we have $1 million and we're going to let you help choose how it's spent. Now, people come if they can have influence. We all know if we can't have influence, it's just really boring.
Our community development group, that's what we call it, was the name it had before we started planning, is based on people's interests, and that's worked a treat. There's 12 people that run the overarching body, and they're all Gary people, but there's some committees that run the events and the connections that happen within Gary travel for an hour to some of those things that we do in Gary. In fact, our volunteers base is an hour from our village. And they go past major towns and they come to Gary because they're heard. They come to Gary because they can take a positive role. And as for holding a meeting where there's arguments, I'm not interested. It's a happy time, it's a place to have lots of laughter, and it's a place to share opinion. And if you sit at our table, you're expected to share your opinion.
I sort of look at this whole thing a little bit differently. I think we're exaggerating the value of democracy and forgetting about the fact that nearly all the good big things that we've got in this country were done in defiance of democracy. And I look at Henry Balby building the Tullamarine Freeway and the Snowy Mountain scheme, the Ord River scheme, the railway system put through the country. A million people were asked whether they like those things or not. We've got to trust in the fact that we've got elected leaders who make a decision in the best interest of the people generally as a whole, because if you're going to be talking to all the objectives all the time, all you'll hear is the objectives. I'm a person who decides that you want to get things done. The way to get things done, have a look at what's happening in Sydney at the moment. They can't build an airport because they're consulting. Why the hell don't the government just get to work and say, we're going to build the airport, do what Henry Balby did here? Never mind about, I remember Henry Balby making a comment, he had some demonstrations in something or other, and then people told him how they were marching in the street. He said, well, I can march till it bloody well puts all. It's not going to make a difference to the decision. And it's time that we've got to make sure that this democracy thing is not just Stalling's principle of doing nothing to make sure we do nothing. I think we've got to get to work and trust in our elected leaders periodically and get things done.
And I believe in a forum like this would have something to say we exaggerate the importance of democracy. To me, that's the whole fundamental of it. And I want to remind you as a trained historian, we didn't build this country by waiting around for committees set up by government. We built this country before we established government, before we created any of the three levels of government. People out there in our rural communities built their communities. They came together. Farmers came together and created co-ops. People came together and built that infrastructure. And then along comes, we need bureaucracy to kind of take control of it. And in the process, we've lost it. I want to remind us of a wonderful example that particularly here in Victoria, you've seen over the last 12 years as a way that when we do engage people, whatever the issue, when demonstrated will be the answer. And that's the community banking movement. You know, that 1995 through 2005, our big boys who love to take control of our development closed down thousands of bank branches across this country. Not because they were losing money, it was all about making more money for the shareholders and how they did it. And along come a group like the Bendigo Bank who say, listen, people, you can actually kind of take control of your own bank, start doing things. And what have we seen, and particularly in the state, a phenomenal example of small communities like the Minyups of this world and others who kind of like said, we can do it. And in the process, we've had 300 communities in the last 12 months in this country have kind of like created their own bank. And the process of that, not just return a banking service, not just return the jobs that went with all of that, but actually return back those dividends. And now when we see those dividends across the country, I'm seeing those same groups of people engaged in their community, creating new health options, improving and building upon their community. Give me democracy anytime. Give me resident involvement anytime. I'm not one of those people that prepares to allow this country to be run by a so-called appointed kind of like group of leaders. We need the engagement of people in the whole process. And when we lose a sense that this is about democracy, particularly at the local government level, I just think we are just in a very poor state.
Okay. Any other comments from panellists?
I think I'm a fan of democracy. I think it's a good thing. But it's that point about the influence and the scale, because not everybody is created equally, and the federal and state government's influence, if you like, over a decision on, say, East-West, for example, is far greater than the level of influence over that decision of the communities most affected. And so I think that goes to the heart of how important the community planning exercise is, and it's a whole of community, but not just a local. You can't ignore the rabbits and the kangaroos because they're DSE's problem. At the end of the day, if you're taking a whole of community approach, you've got to worry about them too, and you've got to bring them to the table.
No, I couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, buck stops with us. Just like to thank Peter for his reference to Bendigo Bank. Proudly say that first two Bendigo banks started in Minyip and Repainted, which are townships of the mighty Yarra Bixar Council.
Oh, and hang on, second one at Elwood. First the good.
Who worries about runners up?
Can I just say one thing to this? Just because you've seen really appalling methods of consultation is no excuse to have no consultation. We just need to do better at it, stop the wheels spinning, be really mindful about the thinking that will get us to a great outcome. No excuse not to consult.
And my opinion on it is that we wouldn't be arrogant enough to say this is the best idea. There's nothing like coming to a meeting with Gary and putting forward an idea and seeing a group of people actually explode it and make it special. So,
fantastic. That last question, Emma.
In terms of your day job and the amount of angst that planning generates in the community, have you, through your role, been able to instill in people who lodge those applications that excite so much of that debate that happens in community, the necessity to engage people in the process?
Not yet. That's part of what attracted me to the job I'm in now at the Planning Institute, because I've seen it from the community side and from council side and a policy side at the MAV, but actually standing in the shoes of the proponents and trying to understand how their investment can help shape communities is a really interesting challenge. And not yet, but then we also haven't been able to pull together a forum on the East-West link because we haven't been able to find people able to speak in support of it or share the information. So it's an interesting space.
James Williams from Greater City of Bendigo. So I know a lot about the bank. My daughter works for the bank, my brother-in-law works for the bank, and half of Bendigo works for the bank. What I love about Bendigo is that they think outside the square. They went against the thinking, as you spoke about it. They went out when banks were shutting down left, right and centre, and they opened community banks. And they gave people that opportunity, I guess, to take control of their destiny. One of the other things they did, which a lot of people aren't aware, is they were the first bank to have internet banking, and they led the way because, again, they're innovative, they're allowed to use their thoughts and things. So around the Bendigo Bank, I guess what I now see as a councillor is that we put a lot of rules and we put a lot of thinking and we tend to be channeled in terms of it. Years ago we did a water quality strategy. Now we can't build a house in a small rural town unless we've got 2.5 acres. Well, hasn't life moved on? Haven't we put too many rules around things? And what really bothers me, not just with the governance stuff, but with the whole bureaucracy, is that we've actually stifled democracy. We've stifled people's thinking and ability to do and achieve exactly what Jan and Lisa talk about here, because we've just become very straight down the line, isn't it? We've got to do it this way. We can't think outside the square. We encourage it, we use all the right words, but then when people actually go to do it, we seem to find a million reasons why they can't. So I guess it's what you've all been talking about. I love your comments, Peter, and that, I think it's fantastic. And I think there are, what would you say, a lot of diverse ways of doing things, and we've heard it today through all the subjects, haven't we? As councillors, we all do it just a bit different, and sometimes by travelling around and looking at how other people do it, we're able to catch on to those ideas. So what I'm saying is I think diversity is a great thing. I don't think we should try and put too many rules around things at times. I think we've gone too far. So I don't know whether someone on the committee would like to comment on that, but it goes with all aspects of society nowadays. So OH, you travel overseas and you look at what they're doing. China, Southeast Asia's gone around, it's technology-wise, the whole thing. And again, it's just because we're just pigeonholed in terms of everything.
Can I just link those last two? Because I've spent my first profession was town planning, and I don't think that, and town planning was the first to get to community engagement, and we legislated around engagement and town planning, and we legislated people's right to object. We didn't enable their right to be involved and participate in the very early stages when something's being designed. I would love architects to understand participatory design. And so I think that, and you were talking about regulation in the previous section, so it's about enabling legislation. I would really hate to see any regulatory stuff done in this space, because we can look to planning and see how it's created a very difficult system for us. As much as I believe in a whole lot of the principles under that planning and planning legislation around engagement, it's been very difficult.
Look, you might call Chris there just in the interest of time. Could we please thank our panel?